And now out to Washington State, where the GMO industry finds itself in another fight against transparency. On the ballot there is Initiative 522, which requires companies to label foods that contain genetically modified ingredients. Now, Washington State is trying to do what California failed to do last year, which has become the first state in the nation to pass GMO labeling. It's believed that 80% of packaged foods in the United States contain GMOs. Now, this debate has attracted an enormous amount of money, a lot of it coming from out of the state of Washington. So far, supporters of GMO labeling requirements have raised more than $7 million in their efforts, mostly from thousands of individual donors. But on the other side, opponents of GMO labeling, mostly biotech companies like Monsanto and DuPont, have raised 3 times as much, more than $22 million. And that cash influx has significantly moved the polls. A survey of likely voters in September showed the labeling measures passing, with 2/3 of voters in support and 22% against. But now, those numbers have narrowed, with only 46% in favor and 42% opposed. We saw a similar poll shift in California last November, just before the GMO labeling measure was defeated. Joining me now for more on this is Alexis Baden-Meyer, Political Director at the Organic Consumers Association. Alexis, good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So let's first explain this ballot initiative. We saw a similar one voted on in California last year. What would this one in Washington specifically do?
Well, it gives us what 93% of the public is demanding: our right to know what's in our food, our right to know if our food contains genetically modified organisms. It's very, very important for consumers to be aware of this issue. And unfortunately, only about 26% of the American public actually knows they're already eating GMO foods. But the American Medical Association came out recently and said that these GMO foods should have been safety tested before we started eating them, and they weren't. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine, a doctor's organization, not quite as powerful as the AMA, but still a great group, lots of pediatricians, they're saying that they're seeing problems in their patients now that they believe are related to GMOs. These include gastrointestinal problems, allergies, even autism may be linked to eating GMOs.
So beyond just the common sense here that people should have a right to know what they're eating, there's also a whole medical dynamic here, because this is definitely an unsettled question in science, whether these foods are healthy or not for you.
Yes.
I mentioned the enormous amounts of money flowing in. Opponents of GMO labeling, mostly these GMO companies like Monsanto and DuPont, have spent $20–30 million in this race to defeat it. They did the same thing in California. What's behind this? Why are they so adamantly opposed to something just as innocuous as labeling their products?
Well, I think it goes to that question of whether GMOs are safe to eat. If they're not safe to eat, they've been feeding us poison, essentially, and they're not going to want to admit that.
The money is having a profound effect, though. I mean, I remember last year, we'd had you on to talk about this issue in California, and the polls showed that this was going to pass overwhelmingly. And then Monsanto and DuPont and the rest of them come in, dump tens of millions of dollars, and then the polls just suddenly shift like that. You know, and I just mentioned in the intro to here that the polls were similar. Overwhelmingly people supporting GMO labeling, all this money gets dumped in, and the polls change. Why is money having such an impact on this issue? And could it be that supporters of GMO labeling are not doing the work they need to do to get the message out through this money? Is there more that they can be doing to compete against this money?
Well, it's tough, because the message on the no side hasn't been that the companies are opposed to consumers' right to know. They've been telling consumers that GMO labels are fine, but that this bill won't give the voters the GMO labels that voters want. The no side has focused on perceived or probably made up exemptions and loopholes that don't actually exist in the law.
And they also kind of focus on extra costs that will burden these companies?
That's right. They take the cost of what it would cost for every company to take the GMO ingredients out of their products, and they say that's what it would cost to label the products. Labels are virtually costless.
So most of the money that's coming from the opposition side is funneling misinformation, basically, behind this issue.
Because they can't win by saying they don't support consumers' right to know.
And as a result of Citizens United and other elections that have allowed all this money to flow into these elections, it's really hard to kind of speak through a lot of that misinformation that's coming out. California tried to become the first state last year to require GMO labeling. Washington now is trying to become the first state to do it. How important is it for that first state to break through? What might we see on a national landscape once one state succeeds in passing GMO labeling? Could it have a ripple effect across the country?
Oh, yes. Already more than half of the states have introduced legislation to label GMOs. And we will see a wave of new legislation being passed all across the country if we win today in Washington state.
And I guess that's why you see those entities staking ground in these states to make sure that GMO labeling fails. But we'll have to see what happens tonight. Alexis Baden-Meyer, political director at the Organic Consumers Association. Thank you.